Okay, I got a little ahead of myself. I forgot to video putting on the fuselage, which is not hard, but here's how I did it. And I did it with CA. Again, I just glued it on with thick CA. I've done some other work since then as well. But the way I did it was I lined up the fuselage onto the wing, and especially to line up the back. I lined it up and I centered it where I wanted. There's obviously the center section. Just make sure it's centered properly. And then on one side, I just took some T-pins, as you can see. And what I did was I had it where I wanted to. I just put the T-pins down on the side where it was going to. What that does is gives me a guide to line up against. And then on the fuselage itself, I just simply pulled it apart and I spread my CA all over it. And then I held the fuselage apart and I slid it on like that. And then I pulled it together and I made real certain, which is actually critical, is the rears are lined up in the back, because those are all machined flat. I mean, the whole thing is machined, so it'll fit together just fine. But you want to make sure the rear is lined up and not twisted or this way or that way, because it's going to be flat. And then all I did was I just held it with my hands and for a while, let the CA dry, and then pulled the pins out. Now on the firewall, to mount the firewall, you'll probably find out that the center, where the wing is going to stick out from the fuselage just a little bit, not much. What you're going to need to do is just take a sharp blade and carefully just make sure to cut it off flush with the firewall. Now you'll also find, I'm going to make sure to include, if I got one here handy, this is a little bit long, a piece of 3/32 dowels, the same thing the wings are made out of. And in the center of the firewall there's a hole, okay, and you want to insert that in there when you're gluing the firewall on. That way you can just eyeball it, actually, when you're kind of safe, because you've got to shim it or shave it a little bit, that way you can see. But as long as that's sticking in there, check and make sure that it's vertical and perpendicular to the firewall on both sides. And then you can just kind of eyeball down the side the wing. Okay, if it looks like it's straight when you're pulling it together your hands, then you're good to go. And the way I glued this one on, I didn't use 5-minute epoxy. I just simply used some Gorilla Glue Clear Grip, which essentially is the same thing as goop, so goop will work just fine. This is essentially the same stuff, so we'll just call it goop, although I'm not using goop. And I glued it on with the fuselage. I put glue onto the fuselage. I pressed the firewall on, pulled it off, and I made sure to add a little bit more on both the firewall and the fuselage, and then I let it set up for about a minute and a half or so, and then I pushed it on, and I had, when I glued it on, I had this rod in there, so I just pulled it with my fingers, and I just kind of held it a little bit until the glue tacked up. And once the glue tacks up, then just set it aside and let it dry. Now it's time to start putting the electronics in. We have made one change to the original design. The original design had a fin going right down the center. That's what the prototype has, but we're going to switch over to one fin on each side to allow for more room to put the ESC and just kind of mess with that a little bit. We also want to be able to put an HD cam. I designed a thing for a battery cover, which I'm not sure I'm going to like that. I think what I'm going to end up doing is making another holder, just put it back here a little bit. That's kind of where we're at. Get some electronics installed. Servos go in here. I've got the wires coming through the bottom, and they go in here. The receiver there. Right here is a 5-volt regulator. It's going to go right there. Speed controller is this happens to be a SpeedX, a 35 amp. It's a 32-bit speed controller. Really like those 32-bit speed controllers. They work really well. Went in there with I've got a video on how to program it to set the brake on and change the PWM to 48 and stuff like that, so it's ready to use in a wing. And we're going to put that right there, and it's going to go in there, and once we get that done, the video VTX on this one is going to be a Mach 2, a full-size one. It'll fit inside there, because I like to, even on these small models, trying to keep the weight down as much as possible. Ideally, we're going to try to get this thing under somewhere around 10 ounces. The prototype's at 10.5, but it's got a little bit of weight in the back, so we made some change to the nose, try to get the CG back a little bit. I don't know if we're going to hit that 10-ounce mark with 2 fins, but we're going to give it our best, because we're trying to keep the wing cube loading kind of low and keep it light, and so we're trying to make a small, stable aircraft to fly around in parks and stuff like that. So see how it goes. Okay, finishing up the Bumble Bee. Now we've got the electronics mounted. Again, one of the reasons we decided to go the double tails allows some more room for the speed controller up front. But I got my 2 servos mounted. Those are actually marked on the plans. I'm using a Mach 2 VTX. I really like those. Of course, any VTX works, but one of the ideas was to be able to put a full-size VTX on this so you can use plenty of power. On the bottom, I've got the receiver mounted here. Power comes off of, I've soldered a positive and negative wire on the speed controller on the 2 terminals there, and I've run a power wire straight down through here. And then the power wire goes to this 5-volt regulator, which is located right here. Power from the 5-volt regulator goes to the receiver, and of course the servos. I've got the wires coming down the bottom through here, and everything is soldered to the receiver. This is a D4R like that, or the X4R. Any of them work. The wires, remember I spoke about the channel. Got the wires coming from the camera straight back into here, and of course the wires going straight down from the VTX in there. And we're running 24 volts to the VTX. You have to do that, otherwise for some reason the video doesn't work. But we're using a 5-volt output off the VTX to run the camera. That'll give some filtering for the camera, which keeps the lines out of it. The other thing I didn't cover was the control horns. These are just regular control horns, and the way we mount those is you just mount to run you a line down here and cut a slot right there on the inboard part of the elevon. And then we push these things through, then cut out the area right around where the control horn goes in there, cut the laminate off, and then simply just using, I use the Gorilla Clear Grip, which is the same as goop. You just glue them in place, and let them dry. And that way it makes us a nice strong control horn. This one's getting a new, this is a new motor. This is an Emax RS 1606. I'm thinking this is going to be a really good motor for this plane. I've tried the 1407, which has got plenty of power, but the problem is I keep burning up motors on 4-inch props. So I kind of like to run the 4-inch props. You could go down probably to 3-inch prop and be okay. But this motor should have the capability to turn a 4-inch prop, and it's light. But the only thing we got left to do is we got to put the fins on. Oh, and then of course, one thing about mounting everything at the bottom here is you got plenty of room for wiring. I always put extra wire in there, so if I ever have to change things around and move it, I don't have to worry about wires being too short. And of course, this gets covered with a battery cover on the bottom. These need to be laminated, piece of laminate. Go over and hold the antenna in place. So, whoops. So the only thing left to do now is the fins. The original design had a center fin, but we've gone to 2 fins on the side to make more room for the speed controller. Fins have got a airfoil already cut into it, and where they're designed to mount is, so the airfoil fits, is right at the back of the fuselage. They go right there. And they'll just glue on each side. You don't need to cut into the wing. All you got to do is remove the laminate here, remove the laminate right there, and then we'll just simply glue it on with some goop style glue by mounting it to the fuselage and running a bead on the bottom, and then just simply putting it in place right there, and there'll be one on each side. And that kind of wraps it up. It'll come with a Coroplast battery cover. I'll have a STL file. I think I've already got it on Thingiverse. Available if you want to print a battery cover out of TPU. This is like about a 1.5 millimeter thick, so it's nice and flexible. Take a magnet, right down there, a piece of metal there, or a magnet on each side. That'll secure it in place. In fact, I've got another one. I have it handy here that I'm going to make available, depending on how it works. This is designed for the Firefly. Little Firefly. You get these off of Banggood for, I don't know, 20, 25 bucks. And it's designed to fit right in there. It's got a little slot for it. And it's got 2 holes in each side that you can run a zippy tie up, hold it in place. I may try this one. I kind of want to do some HD flying with this airplane and see how it works. But I'll probably make that available too if you want to print them. And of course, if you're good at drawing up and printing, you can certainly create your own.